The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
Welcome to Planting Seeds, Philanthropy in Saskatchewan, a show where we aim to connect you to the community impact that's being powered by donors and charities across the prairies. I'm your host, Victor, with the South Sask Community Foundation, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, I'm joined today by Jessica Pratt-Longman with Inclusion Regina, and we're going to get into a good conversation. But first, I just wanted to give a little bit of context of what we're going to be talking about here today. So one of the initiatives that the South Sask Community Foundation it's wrapped up for 2023, but it's called the Truth and Reconciliation Fund, which is a grant opportunity that we've seen tons of different organizations apply to. And I just wanted to give a little bit of an update about the fund, and then we can go into the project if that's okay. So, and this actually might be news to you as well, but we just wrapped this up. I actually just looked at these numbers the other day, and this year, the fund was able to support 26 charitable programs with a total of $243,000. And the fund is intended to address programs that will advance the truth and reconciliation calls to actions around the areas of education, culture, and language. And we're looking at across South Saskatchewan in Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 areas. One thing that's really neat, and I didn't notice this the other day, but we actually had over 50 applications, and the request total was $1.16 million of what people were asking for. So what that really told us was, there was 1.16 million asked. We only had the room to give out about 243,000 this year. So that demand of funding towards Indigenous programming within our region is huge. This is like a small litmus test too. We've never gone into this territory before of being very specific to cultural funding like that. And it's really, really clear to us that these programs are needing support in order to make our communities just stronger, better places to live. So with all that out of the way, we're here to talk about a very specific grant from that pool of funding this year, which is a grant that went to Inclusion Regina for a program called Foundations, which is Indigenous Cultural Programming. And it was a grant of just over $9,600 through the Truth and Reconciliation Fund. And with that, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Inclusion Regina and maybe your history with CORE as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently the Indigenous Cultural Advisor for Creative Options Regina. I started this role kind of part-time, in a part-time way, before coming on full-time. It wasn't a role that I initially applied for. CORE also supports my brother. His name's Patrick, and he's an amazing human being. He also has autism and is nonverbal. So they've been a part of our lives for about 7 years now. And I was doing cultural things that were important to us with Patrick and his team. And CORE kind of went, hey, we have other individuals in CORE who are really asking to be connected to these same things. Would you be willing to come in a cultural capacity? And so that's kind of how my cultural journey started with CORE.
Oh, that's fantastic. Just to get some base understanding for the audience too, would you mind explaining a little bit about, what does CORE do and who do they serve? And then how does that differ with Inclusion Regina?
Yeah, so CORE is an organization rooted in gentle teaching. And the terminology is different, but essentially gentle teaching and Indigenous culture, they are one and the same once you understand both of them. So we support people with all abilities. So some of the individuals we support can have, like my brother, like autism or physical limitations, complex medical needs, things like that. And so we're really about meeting our folks where they're at and seeing them for who they are and not for their disability. And Inclusion Regina, admittedly, my knowledge in that is limited, but they are a literacy, respite, free program that's offered to individuals who I think otherwise couldn't really afford programs like that.
No, that's fair. And I know that we talked about this ahead of time, that you've been with CORE for a long time, and then this program is really what has moved you over to Inclusion Regina to kind of head this program. So maybe, if you don't mind, can you tell us a bit about the Foundations program and what it is and how it's, I guess, happening throughout the year?
Yeah, so the Foundations program, actually, in all honesty, was my coworker Nick's kind of dreamed up in his head and kind of really brought it to life. And I guess it's our hope and goal to bring meaningful and impactful culture and programming to our folks. And so because our folks have unique, complex sensory needs, it makes us have to be really, sometimes we need to be creative in how we bring that culture to them in a positive, impactful way. Because not everybody can just get up and go to the sweat lodge or the round dance or the, any other kind of ceremonies like that. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't still be connected to it too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, connection to culture is so important for any culture, and especially in a case like this where we're trying to find ways to really meaningfully, restore culture that deserves to be at the forefront. And I guess when you talk about, because as you mentioned, in this case, it might not be easy just to get up and go to a round dance or a sweat lodge. So how do you look at engaging people through this program? How do you get them involved?
Yeah. So our plans are, some of the different things we're going to do is we are going to host a round dance in partnership with another Indigenous nonprofit organization. We are looking at doing the 7 sacred teachings. It really has kind of grown and developed into, I call it the 10 sharing the knowledge sessions. And every week, or I don't know if it's twice a week, still kind of working out the logistics of what it's going to look like. Folks are going to come and we're going to go through different teachings and different activities, different workshops. And they're going to range from the 7 sacred teachings to the 7 sacred rites, to the TP teachings, to the medicine wheel, to MMIW, Orange Shirt Day, learning how to be, learning how to make dream catchers, learning how to do mini round dances, the potato dance, fun stuff like that. And so I think it's consistency. It's bringing our folks into a space that they're familiar with a program they're already familiar with, faces they're already familiar with, and then bringing them small pieces of culture in small doses, right? And what we're doing at CORE isn't the be-all and end-all of culture. It isn't you come and do these 10 sessions and, Indigenous culture, right? It's like a branch. It's like a look into the Indigenous world. And that branch is connected to, massive trees that have deep roots. And if people want to reach out to that branch and continue that journey, that's kind of really the hope.
Well, if I remember correctly, this is kind of sparking, I guess, a couple of things. One is that you mentioned earlier about it's a lot about meeting people where they're at. So that's really what I hear is that, because it's not as easy and accessible to maybe go out to these big events, it's like creating these more controlled environments for people to make sure it works for them where they're at in a comfortable way is really, really important. So that totally makes sense to me. And another thing that I noticed, I think it was from the application of this grant when we were looking at it earlier in the years, I remember it saying something along the lines of, how when we talk about truth and reconciliation and we talk about bringing in people, either Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to really partake and create a better future, that a lot of times, people with that are living with certain disabilities often just get forgotten or put to the wayside, or they're overlooked because it's not as visible. So it's nice to see that a program like this really makes sure that they're not overlooked. And as you mentioned, it's an important thing for everybody. So they're no exception to that.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. Within the disability sector, I have no knowledge of anything remotely close to what it is that we're trying to develop and create here at CORE. So it is really exciting to to have the opportunity to be a part of that and to do that.
Yeah.
And really a lot of that's been made possible, through this grant. So thank you for that. That gives us, it makes it possible for us to do the things that we're doing right now. Yeah, it makes it possible for me to join Inclusion Regina in this way and to deliver this programming in a way that hopefully helps fit them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, absolutely. And I mean, it's like, speaking on behalf of the foundation, it's really our pleasure to try to do work like this. I don't think I'm alone in community foundations in general in saying this, but trying to find the right role within working with Indigenous organizations, Indigenous culture in an appropriate kind of impactful way is something that we're continually going on. So, like this fund, it's hopefully the first step in many, because it can't be the last step for us. So, I appreciate the thanks, but the reality is, we really do thank organizations like yours for stepping up and finding ways to do this important work. And this is just kind of even more insight for you on the grant process. As I mentioned, our foundation, we've never really intentionally engaged with Indigenous communities and Indigenous people and that cause in this way before this grant. And it was really nice for us to see the projects that were coming in with such strong intent. And another thing that we actually saw too is there's a lot of organizations that were partnering with Indigenous organizations that otherwise might not have been able to actually get a grant because they weren't a registered charity or things like that. It's really nice to see, I think, the collaboration that can come out of community as a result of opportunities like this. So I'm hoping that's something that we can kind of keep seeing as we go forward.
Yeah, and that is something that CORE is also going to be doing. And I don't want to name the organization because I haven't really talked about this with them yet, but I did approach them, and the I don't know if she's the CEO or the director of that organization was very excited and very happy that I reached out and talked to her and asked her, hey, how would you feel about partnering to do this specific event? And she said she was really grateful and excited because rather than her struggle to hold this event with half of their resources and or us try to struggle to hold the event with the resources we have, we could partner together and throw or host an impactful, successful collaboration event that would I think could just be greater because they're being done together versus trying to us both do separate things.
Absolutely. I just want to move it back a little bit. You're talking a little bit about the workshops, and you mentioned like the 7 sacred teachings and some other pieces. Do you mind maybe walking the audience through like what are those workshops like? What are the 7 sacred teachings in a nutshell?
So the 7 sacred teachings specifically, they are Anishinaabe teachings. I'm born Saulteaux and Cree. I'm adopted Anishinaabe and recently married Ojibwe. And so I really kind of pull all my teachings from those backgrounds and have elders, and I don't like the word elders, my old people come from those backgrounds. And so that's where the 7 sacred teachings really kind of came from. My mushim, Pete Big Stone, he's a Sundance chief, lodge carrier, just a really knowledgeable man in culture. And I'm just extremely blessed to have him, as a resource to reach out to. And I've taken a number of course, people to see him for different things like their names, sweat lodge, stuff like that. So it really kind of came from him and his teachings. And so, I mean, the 7 sacred teachings are some of our guiding kind of principles, the things that we live by, to live our life in a good way, to see good in people, to do good for ourselves, but for other people. So you have the turtle for truth, you have the beaver for wisdom, you have the wolf for humility, you have the bear for courage, you have the eagle for love, You have the buffalo for respect, and you have the sabu or the sasky, which is the Sasquatch for honesty. And we believe in those teachings and those beings, like whole, with our whole being, right? And we try to walk with those really in everything that we do, along with other things, right? Along with the TB pole teachings and the medicine wheels, they're really the grounds or the foundations for who we are as people, and the impacts that we want to have and the lives that we want to lead for ourselves and with each other, right? And we believe that all beings are created equal, right? That's why everything we do is done in a circle, because no one is greater or better than another. And this includes the plant lives, this includes the animals. So we don't look at the bear or the eagle or the turtle as less than ourselves. They're beings the same as like you and I, and we learn from them, and we take those teachings into our lives to help guide us in a natural and in a good way. Because I know there's people out there that think they're greater or better than, these animals that we derive our teachings from. And I think when you forget that you're dependent on Mother Earth for everything that you have, you can think that. But realistically, like, we believe all human beings drink breast milk, right? It's the water from Mother Earth, and she's a being. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
No, I think that did. I think that gave a kind of a good insight in, and to be honest, you did answer the question, and you kind of answered it in a way that I was taught actually at a conference recently, and it was all around that idea of the circle. And it's kind of interesting. I think this is one thing that I've experienced in my short time kind of being in conversations with people or being in workshops with Indigenous people, like teaching on Indigenous people, Indigenous ways, is that, in our society, kind of a colonial society as it exists, things are linear. Things go up and down, left and right. And that's, as you mentioned, it's not. Things go in a circle. And a lot of times, like, answers go in a circle, solutions go in a circle, like speech goes in a circle, if you're doing it from an Indigenous perspective a lot of times. So I think you did answer it, but you actually did do a little bit of circle speak to get back to it. So I think what you did was really, really good. How many, do you guys have a grasp of, I guess, how many people you kind of expect to be benefiting from this program, I guess, directly?
No, I can't. I can't provide you with an answer, just because there's so many things that we're doing within this grant, right outside of even the 7 sacred teachings. We are looking at doing the ribbon shirt making workshops, the skirt making workshops. We are looking at the round dance. We are looking at Indigenous storytelling. We still are kind of working out the kinks in that. I think it was originally Indigenous literature book club. And then we talked about how that was a little bit like confining or restrictive and kind of came from colonial mindset. Because if you think about it, a long time ago, all of our stories were oral. We didn't have book club or chapter club, things like that. So we're looking at, bringing in people and telling their stories or telling traditional storytelling teachings, things like that. And then the 10 sharing the knowledge sessions is something that we hope to continuously do, right? Just over and over and over again, and change it and modify it to be the best that it can be, because there might be things in it that people already know or other things people want to know. And so it would be really hard to gauge a number, right, of who's going to all benefit from it. I would say many people are going to, but as a specific number, I really couldn't provide one. I'm sorry.
Just because it's kind of broad. Well, I can't remember too, because that's a question we always ask in the applications, and to be totally honest, like, depending on what the program is, like, the number can range greatly on what is expected, partially just because you're not totally sure how it's going to take off. So no, that's totally fine. That was just one of the things I was kind of wondering. I guess another thing is, what are some of the short-term impacts and maybe long-term impacts you're hoping or thinking you might see as a result of delivering this program?
Short-term impacts, I think, is just that general knowledge. Mm-hmm. It's just that connection, that opportunity to be involved with culture, to know that this is a piece of them. Mm-hmm. For individuals that do have Indigenous roots, mm-hmm. And then for the people who are non-Indigenous who are also going to come and participate, it's learning to just walk together. It's mm-hmm. learning to kind of bridge that gap between mm-hmm. non-Indigenous and Indigenous. Mm-hmm. They say we walk in two worlds, right? As anybody who comes from colonial world and from a cultural world. Mm-hmm. And I think really the hope is that it is just one world. Mm-hmm. And us as Indigenous people can walk in both, and then our non-Indigenous friends and families and allies will learn and know as much as our world as we know of theirs, and mm-hmm. they'll be able to walk fluently with us too.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that might be more kind of long term, but mm-hmm. on the short term basis, it is really for me personally. My hope is that it sparks that interest. My hope mm-hmm. is that I want to come back. I want to learn. I want to know this. And then long term for them to go and take it in their own lives and to continue that learning, right? Because I'm one person, and the reality is there are many ways, right? Mm-hmm. There is no one right way. What I say and teach to people, other people say and teach the same thing, but then there are other people who have different teachings or different ways. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And none of them are wrong, they're just different, and that's okay. So yeah, short term, I hope it's a spark, and long term, I hope they invest themselves into Indigenous culture as much as they would like to. Yeah.
No, that totally makes sense. I think that aligns a lot with what we're seeing too when we talk to a lot of different organizations, and we really look at this type of programming, and it just it reminds me a little bit like when you talk about that spark, is like that spark in culture, I think is so important for people, especially young people, to connect with, mm-hmm. to just try to find purpose in their life. Like so much of our purpose is defined by the culture we have. And if you don't have that culture, it doesn't necessarily, but it can make a huge gap in who your identity is and how you understand your identity. And there was one story too. This was we were actually at the Community Foundations of Canada national conference, and I was really lucky to step in one session with an Indigenous storyteller who really, honestly, it was about 2 hours of just hearing incredible stories. But one of the stories he gave us was he talked about when he was young and he was kind of in trouble with the law. And I'm paraphrasing, but he ended up working community work at a specific center. And he said that when he was at that center was the first time he had ever been exposed to Indigenous culture in his life. And it was through the drum. And he said that he walked up to this room and he saw all these big kind of, he said like these big scary looking guys, like, cause he was like just a young kid, like all just like pounding this drum and doing the singing. And he said that he just sat there as a teenager and just started to weep. And that like, he just felt this like overwhelming kind of everything at once, and like saw something about himself that he had never seen before and couldn't experience. And he talked about how, the men invited him in, he started to play the drum with them, and how that, as you mentioned, like that was a spark that created meaning in his life, that then created the ability and the desire to go on a path to learn more, to do more. So as you mentioned, that spark is one of those things that you hope there's a lot of people that are experiencing that and feeling that aha moment, whether they're Indigenous or someone who's non-Indigenous, to realize kind of the beauty in the culture as well.
Yeah, and that is just it. That is that spark. That is kind of what I'm talking about when I'm thinking mm-hmm. about, especially when you think about all the damage that has been done. Mm-hmm. Again, being from the George Gordon First Nation, we had the longest federally run residential school in Canada, right? Mm-hmm. Closing in 1996. Mm-hmm. I want to say I was like 3 at that time. Yeah. I'm the first or second generation at a residential school, just kind of depending on which bloodline you look at for my mm-hmm. family. But they all have stories and sharings of this well-known painting that was in the residential school when you walked in. And on one side was the church and the Bible and the rosary, and that was how you got to heaven, right? And on the other side was a sweat lodge and sweetgrass and different medicines, and that was how you got to hell. And those create lasting impacts, right? Those create people to be fearful of culture. It creates them to believe that their culture is wrong or to be ashamed of it. And I say this all with personal experience. But, you know, even within CORE, we had an individual who the team was, nope, this person wants nothing to do with culture. They want to talk about it. They want nothing to do with it, right? And, you know, there's one person on the team kind of put his hand up and he's like, well, actually, I had a braid of sweetgrass hanging around from my car, and he grabbed it, or this individual grabbed it, and knew what it was, and asked to have it, and asked questions. And that might seem really little, but it's not, because it's, one, it's knowledge. There is some knowledge there. And two, it's that interest. It is that spark. It is that curiosity. And so I was really trying to explain to the team, like, you have to remember, like, his ancestors, his blood, or their ancestors, their bloodlines have been taught for a long time that this is wrong, this is bad. And that could be somewhere deep in this individual's bones, right? And when we find that one thing, whether it's a feather or the drum or the rattle, the 7 sacred teachings, the beading, the music, whatever it is, that little spark, that's the hope. That's for whoever it is, because it's different for everybody, but to find that little spark and to carry it wherever they want to carry it, right? Let it grow, let it have life, and it does become a way of life, right? That little spark turns into a way of life, because that's what Indigenous culture is.
Yeah, Jessica, we're just wrapping up now, and I just want to say I really appreciate your time here today, and we love the work that Inclusion Regina is doing, and we want to thank you for making sparks happen.
Yeah. No, thank you again for the opportunity and the support through CORE and through Inclusion Regina, and helping us provide this opportunity to, you know, our folks that, again, it might not otherwise be possible for them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to learn more about how you can make an impact in your own community, visit the South Sask Community Foundation online at sscf.ca, or find us on our social media channels on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter.
If you'd like to share your feedback on the program you just watched, contact us today.